Hey, welcome to the Simple Nutrition Podcast, a show that helps you learn practical and actual nutrition tips from an expert. I am your host, Leonila Campos, a registered dietitian with over 8 years of experience in the nutrition field. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today in the Simple Nutrition Insights Podcast. I am your host, Leonila Campos, registered dietitian, and today I have a special guest, Maduro, who is also a registered dietitian and a friend, and I am really excited to have her in my podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different from the other ones where I usually talk about some kind of nutrition tips, but we wanted to do this episode more so around business and like what it really takes to be a private practice dietitian, all the things that go into it. So yeah, welcome, Nas. I'm so excited to have you today.
Thank you for inviting me. I am excited to be here as well. And it's definitely something new to me. This is my first ever podcast. So let's see how this goes.
Yeah, absolutely. You are pretty calm, which is great. Sometimes I remember when I first started my podcast, this is a little bit over a year ago in like mid-January. And I have been wanting to do a podcast for a long time. But, we get imposter syndrome and we have like these A-type personality where like I need to have A, B, C, D and like be ready. But I had another dietitian colleague, Kim Tarapelli, who started her podcast, and she's like, yeah, it's not that complicated. You can totally do it. And so the following week I said, you know what, I'm just going to go for it and do it. And it has been amazing. I started with like one podcast every week, and then slowly I increased it to 2 episodes a week. And then more so later in the year, last year, I decided to do an episode in English and then an episode in Spanish. So that has been great. So but tell us a little bit about yourself and like where you're located and in your book too, because you're an author. So that's pretty amazing.
Yes. So, I'm in very hot, sunny Florida right now. And it's hot in my room. My AC went off this morning. So not so exciting. So I'm trying to keep it calm so I don't sweat too much because it's definitely hot in here. So I'm in Florida and I'm a registered dietitian. I've been a dietitian for over 10 years now, closer. It's been over 10 years, but in private practice, 10 years for sure. I started my practice out of New York City. That's where I grew up. I was actually born in the Dominican Republic, and then I came to the U.S. at the age of 10, and I grew up in New York City, which is so great. Like now that I moved out, I realized how much of how great that city is for creating a career and having a lot of exposures to different things, different people, very smart people. I got the luxury of working with a lot of great other dietitians and other people who are not even in dietetics, doctors, other business people. So, been a dietitian for 10 years out of New York City. I have my office in New York. I have my office here in Florida, specifically in Miami, but soon to be moved to Boca Raton, which is a lot closer to where I live. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is crazy how, and it's been, for me, I'll be a dietitian for 9 years in March. And it's crazy to think like, wow, it's been that long.
Yes, right? I feel old sometimes. I'm like, how the hell did that happen?
Right? You're like, oh, yeah, that definitely happened. But it's amazing to see too that you have been able to write a book, right? And I'll make sure to add the link in the show notes. So if, it's an amazing book, check it out. But tell us about your book and like maybe the reasons why you decided to create that book.
Yes. So the book is called Latino Nutrition, the easy weight loss guide for Latinos. So it's a book that is very near and dear to my heart because when I think of resources for this community, there's not a lot out there. And the resources that are out there are not really from registered dietitians. They're like usually other people that write, but they don't have the same expertise as dietitians. And I wanted to make sure that it was something relevant for the people that I typically see, which is the people who don't have a lot of health literacy. So it had to be something that was easy to understand, like if you were 5 years old. So my book, it's recipes. So there's a lot of Latino recipe. It's a recipe book that also teaches you how to create your own meal plan that is culturally relevant. It's very illustrated, heavily illustrated. It's not your typical recipe book where you have a picture and you have the instructions and the directions. It's a lot of our directions are not just written, but they're drawn. Like I had a designer design the book because I wanted to make sure that somebody could look at the process of creating the recipe and know without even reading what they're supposed to do. And we accomplished it. I had a really talented artist helping me, create this book, and my social media manager who helped me create the recipes. And then myself really put it all together into this way that makes sense for people who want to start eating healthy without leaving their culture, the cultural foods aside, and really make it sustainable, find something that they could implement in their lives. And the great thing is that the book is both in English and in Spanish. It's available on Amazon in all platforms. It's available for Kindle. You have all the options that you want available there. So the reason that I wrote the book also, it was because I was in a period of my life where I was not motivated to be an entrepreneur. And the book kept me going. It was a passion project of mine more than anything. I was not looking to make any money on it. And I told you this before. It was not a strategy for money. It was a strategy for two things, to keep me going and to branding, because I really want to be known as the Spanish speaking Latina dietitian who help people lose weight in a healthy way, not your typical way that on a diet based approach. It's really with a plan. That's kind of my slogan: create a plan, not a diet, because it can be done.
That it's so amazing to see that we get into these projects, like personal projects, to keep us going, right? Especially being private practice dietitians or business owners, because we know that it's so difficult. And I think one of the reasons why we decided to do this podcast is that not a lot of people talk about these. It is so hard to like keep going at times when you're like, oh my gosh, everything that I'm doing is not giving me the results, right? And it could be for different reasons, but I think going into private practice, right, is something that you really have to love, but also understand that it's not going to be easy, right? It's not like your 8 to 5 job that you go in, you do the work, and you come home and you forget about everything else. No, you're going to be working after 5 p.m. You're going to be working on the weekends, right? Because you're not only the dietitian in your private practice, you are the business owner, you are the tax person, you are the administrator, you have all of these roles, right? And so I think either for our RD2Bs, right, or for dietitians that are thinking about private practice, being able to understand that, right? Not to only listen to all these beautiful things about you're going to make this X amount of money and you're going to have the freedom and the flexibility. You also have to understand what it really takes, right? You've been in private practice longer than I have, so I'm sure you
Since
can
day
share.
zero. Yeah, when I started, I always wanted to be in private practice. I never thought of myself as being a dietitian working anywhere else but in my own practice. So I knew that was what I wanted. So I kind of started it very early on, 2-3 months before I passed my test, I began to work with a GI doctor under his private practice with the idea of growing my practice. And that was his consensus that we had, that I was going to grow my practice. So I really had his help in terms of, putting in the resources, the staff, and of course getting a cut of anything that I was going to make, but I was going to be responsible for growing it. I was going to be out doing my marketing. He would teach me so many ways of like how to market myself and my practice. And, that's how we took off. Since 3 months before, he kind of hired me, trained me. And I say trained me with quote unquote, because it was not something that he necessarily trained me how to do things. I kind of just saw him do it and replicate what he was doing. And after COVID and in New York City, we were all at home for many, 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 many months. I think it was really like a year that we were at home. I wanted to do telehealth, and that was kind of the time that I decided to go solo and part ways with the GI doctor, because I wanted to be telehealth. And, the only way that I was going to be able to do that, because he wanted me to go to, part of our partnership was to go into the office, because honestly, New York City, that works really well, because people want to be in the office. People want to see you in person, especially back then where telehealth was such a new thing, and it was really hard. It was really, really hard for our communities to kind of even understand how to put the video on their phone. I was like, no, I'm going to try to do this, and I had to part ways. And that's how I went solo. And I'll tell you, it's been rewarding. I definitely have grown this thing to more than I could ever imagine. But the risks are high. And I tell our D2Bs or just dietitians who want to go into private practice, this is not a walk-in. You're going to be invested mentally, financially, emotionally. And as your life changed, you have to accommodate sometimes your life around this thing, because it's a baby, and it's up to you to grow this thing from being a baby to a toddler to eventually an adult. And you're going to have those teenage years that are going to be so hard that you would wish you want to stay sometimes in a W-2 job, because the risks are high, especially in healthcare. It's a risky business because it's highly it's very regulated. We're in a very regulated industry. It's not like we're opening up a laundromat and that's it. We have to make sure our comply with all these laws, and we know them all of a sudden, because you kind of you're responsible immediately after you open your doors. You're responsible to know it all. Otherwise, you are at risk of being penalized because you didn't know, but you were supposed to know. And that's really hard when you're starting out. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I give you props for going solo in 2019 when it was like, or just during COVID time, because it was so unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. And it's so interesting because that's when at the end of 2019, that's when I decided to create my corporation or my company to go into private practice. Same thing as you, right? I was like, I want to be able to help more people, help my community. And I know the only way that I can do it, right, is to go and like open my business. And I think I was more conservative because I didn't know what was going to happen, right? I opened it in 2019, and the idea was like, okay, 2020, I'll start doing my marketing and my outreach, and then like everything closed, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, should I still do it, or should I just like be in the background working on things and still continue to work at the dialysis clinic, because that's where I was working at that time. And I hesitated so much, and I said, you know what? I'm just gonna work in the background, still have my job just to supplement that income. And that's when, I decided to like do the insurances and just that process. That process, usually the credentialing and contracting, usually takes 3 to 6 months, but that, for some insurances took me like a whole year because it was, pandemic time. So things got lost and it was chaos. But yeah, it's so interesting to see, just remember what the process is, of like starting your business and growing it, and then being in that time frame of like what am I doing? Right? Like, is this worth it? Because you
Yeah.
do get to that point, right? You question yourself.
Yeah, all of that, you like I said, you're going to get tested mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually, in all ways. And as your life changes, it becomes like you have to understand your why very clearly to keep doing this because it's not easy. Like, for example, I started when I was 20. I literally turned 21 in my first RD job. And I was like, how am I seeing kids? I just turned 21. I remember thinking about this. But if I were to start now at 30, it will be totally different. My risk tolerance is much less now because I have a lot. I have a mortgage. I want kids. I have all these things that I have planned for my own personal life that may not fit for the type of business that I want now, that I have now, and that back then I wanted. So I was way more bigger risk taker back when I was in my 20s, and now because my priorities were different. So if you're a mom out there, RD2B, who is thinking about this, that's important to start thinking about it because again, it's another child that you're gonna give birth to, and if you want to keep it for a long time, you're gonna have to invest a lot of your time, your energy, your emotions into it. The good things that we have a lot more community, I feel, in this space than when I started. There was like nah. Every information out there was like doctor based. Like these are the codes you gotta build. Like they're not the same as RD codes. That's why I lost so much money when I started that it's ridiculous. I was living with my mom, so thank goodness. But again, the money that I've lost for the first 5 years is crazy. And I worked other jobs before I went in full time in my private practice. So that's another thing, you can grow these things as little or as big as you want. I think all RDs should be business owners to some capacity, whether that is just taking self-pay or just commercial insurance, just one insurance. You don't even have to go into Medicaid or Medicare if you don't want to open that can of worms because it's part of growing your brand, it's part of growing your income, it's part of creating legacy. Tax wise is beneficial. I see the benefits of having a business. Everybody should be a business owner, but not necessarily own a private practice.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting. In a way, funny what you said about losing money. I think it's part of being a business owner, right? You're going to lose money. I definitely lost a lot of money starting and like not either billing wrong or like seeing somebody for like so many sessions and then the insurance was like, no, we're not covering. And you're like, shoot, what do I do now? Like I can't ask the patient to pay because that was on my end. Right? That was my fault.
Yeah.
So you just eat the cost and you tell the patient, why your insurance is not going to cover. Give them the option if they want to continue, right? Or you eat the cost essentially. But yeah, I've lost so much money, and sometimes because I remember my why as to like why I wanted to open my business and helping the underserved population, and sometimes keeping them pro bono and you're just losing, right? And you're like, well, I can't really do these for everybody because I'll be probably broke if I don't charge anybody. So you do have like these conflicting situations where you want to help, but you cannot get paid, right, to help everybody because you're still a business owner.
In already a profession that doesn't have a lot of economic opportunity because our profession is great and we do so many great things, but we simply just don't get paid well. And that's one of the reasons why I had to leave New York because I hated it. At the beginning, I did. I was like, I gotta get out of this place, especially coming out of COVID and like being at home all this time. Like it was not the city that I grew up with. Now it's becoming a little bit like that. And it's still the greatest city in the world, I think, for many reasons. Financially, I had to leave a highly taxed state to a state that I could save me more on taxes. Like when I graduated in 2017, the average home in Long Island was $384,000. That's kind of like the price range. 2024, it's over 700,000. And the average, and Long Island is kind of like the suburbs in New York, which was closer to where I lived in Queens. The average dietitian salary in New York City in 2017 was $63,000. In 2024, $75,000. The big gap between can you actually afford a home in New York, it's like before it was hard. Like you kind of had to have a partner to have the second salary to be able to do the down payment for a $384,000 home. Now the gap is you have to jump from a $75,000 to over $700,000 home in Long Island. So I had to leave. I had to move out of New York to be able to buy my first place. And even then, we're right now in 2025, interest rates are high. Home prices are high. It's not like Florida is cheap anymore. We just have better taxes. You can save more on taxes, but really that's it. It's not cheap here. So, these are the things that as you get older, you have to begin to think about where you live, what are the, economic opportunities you have there, and the profession that you're in. We're unfortunately in a profession that doesn't pay well. We work a lot. And if you don't become an owner or a manager outside of dietetics, like a manager of a program or something, you're probably not going to make enough to sustain just enough money to have a family and a home, which is the basics in my view.
Right. It's frustrating in a way, right? Because, well, now even more so for the new dietitians that have to have a master's, right? And yet they're like, well, we might not consider that as in your salary, but we almost have as much schooling as a doctor, right? Because now we're going to have a master's degree, right? That's 6 years. And then we have to do an internship, which is 1,200 hours of supervised practice, right? So we have this such higher education, but yeah, the salary is not matching, right? So sometimes it's so crazy and frustrating to see that, like when I'm just browsing LinkedIn or Indeed, and they're like a dietitian position and they want to pay them $20. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like that's below what our education means, right? So it is so definitely frustrating to see that we should be compensated better because of our expertise. We are specialists, right?
Yes, and we know our stuff. I mean, the problem with nutrition, it's like the wild west of wellness. Like if you open your mouth and you immediately have somebody contradicting you around anything. So because we all eat as human beings, we all have an experience with nutrition, we all have an opinion about it, and we live in an attention-seeking society now. Like if you are an influencer, let's just put it like that, and you have the attention of 100 people, and I am a doctor or a dietitian and only have the attention of 50 people, who do you think people are going to listen to? The attention-seeking person. So that has created a lot more problems than solutions in our space. I think now we have to also be great at communicating, do things like this, which is podcasting, or it's just, in our space, it's very difficult. I find it difficult because again, it's a wild west of wellness, and you're gonna have a lot of negative comments, or I am not ready for that. I already have enough mental things that I have to deal with the business. And then on top of that, you put social media and people's comments that very deep inside of you, if you get a negative comment, which I haven't, thank God, but I haven't been out there, like, oh, here's the sexiest thing that could ever happen. I don't do that. So, I think that the newer generations have to really think about this when they want to get into a career like ours, because if you need to be a good communicator, you need to try to grab attention. If you want to be in business or do private practice like we do, and we see patients, we don't have to do all these attention seeking things because, thank goodness insurance still pays for our services. It's not going to be a lot, but the way that I see it scaling this is by grabbing attention from hundreds of people and have them, buy something for me. That's really how I see it as a scale. I don't see the business of insurance being easily scalable because every year since I have started this again, I've been doing this for 10 years, we've seen a reduction in coverage or payments. 3% this year we got a pay cut from Medicare. I don't see it being very scalable personally long term. Having other dietitians under your practice, I just think it'll be really financially difficult. I think as a solo provider, good, but having more dietitians long term, it's hard because you're at the mercy of the government for a lot of these things.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of things to consider, right? And keep in mind. And it's not to scare anybody, right? But I think it's important to understand what it really goes behind the scenes and like the things that we have to do day after day. We just don't only see people and build insurance and you're going to get paid, right? Like there's so many technicalities that you have to go through, and like they might pay, they might not pay, right? Or like they might have a copay or whatever the case may be. And so, all those things matter. But I think at the end of the day, right, being able to still provide services for our communities and those people that are reaching out. Sometimes that's all you need to keep you going at times too, or knowing like, wow, I'm making a difference, right? This person is seeing a change in their health and like they're getting better. And so sometimes that's all you need, right? To keep you going.
And you know what I'm doing now just to keep me going also financially, because I feel like it's important to talk about this because for young people, one of the things that they're struggling with the most, and I include myself, is having economic opportunity for things that, say, our parents had the option to like buy a house with their, salary, or have kids and have money to have kids, like things like that. People my age and, I'm in my 50s, and people in their 20s just have a big struggle. And I think people younger than me feel today like hopeless. And that is not a good feeling, because then you're not going to try. If you feel hopeless, you're not going to try. I don't feel hopeless. I feel we need to diversify as business owners. I don't see my private practice in the future to be my only source of income. I need to learn other stuff, like the market. How does the stock market work? How could I, if this thing, if Maduro Nutrition doesn't grow to be something sellable in the future, if I cannot sell it for like anything, at least I have this retirement account that by the time I'm 60 or 65, at least I'm going to have a good living. Like things like that you have to begin to learn, that I did not learn in school. My parents, of course, did not learn because they're immigrants. So I had to learn this myself to try to create this safety net for myself, because I know I am very aware that I chose the hardest path, which is entrepreneurship, and it's hard. So every business owner needs to begin to diversify and look at their portfolio of how they're going to be making money now and in the future, because we can't keep doing this forever. I think private practice at some point needs to either be sold or it needs to be closed, because I can't see patients until I'm 70 years old at the same rate that I'm seeing patients now.
Right. Yeah, I think that is a really good point to remember. And when you see these other successful business owners, right? And just successful people in general, they are spending or not spending, investing. They are investing in the market. They're investing in like different things, right? Because that is what's going to help them when they retire, right? Or that investment is going to grow, passively grow. And so, which is something, first of all, these are things that we don't learn in our undergrad, right? As dietitians, we don't learn private practice or business at all. I decided to go back and get my master's in business administration, right? So I know some of those things, but it wasn't to the point where I felt comfortable, right? To be like, oh, this is what I need to do. And so if you're not you don't have that business background, right? It's definitely a little bit more difficult, not to say impossible, because there's so much information. You can even take classes at community colleges to help you with like business. But I think investing is definitely something that we should all do at a younger age. And I love that you mentioned, right, that this is not something that we learn from our parents, because our parents, and just like your parents, my mom is, immigrant too. And so that's not something that we learned. She is a business owner though. Like she's always had a business. So I think that's part of why I wanted to become my own business owner, because she's always had some kind of business, right? A salon, a barber shop. I mean, these women, she's so resourceful. So I think it's amazing, that to see that from someone that didn't finish elementary school, right? So just having that ingrained, right? And like, just understand like, hey, we are resourceful. We can make it, right? Like whatever
And
you
if
need
you
to
think
do.
about it, I think immigrants are the risk takers because they don't have when they come here, they don't have the same access to corporate America like we have. Like I could potentially, go back into say business school and try to work in corporate America. I speak language, I know the culture, I have chances to get to that. Our parents did not. So the only chance that they had to really take care of their family was to be resourceful and to be risk takers and to open up businesses that could allow them to take care of their family. And that's all they cared. They didn't care about, okay, when I'm 60, I need to have enough money because they can't, like now I am my mom and my dad's vacay. Like I am the person that needs to take care of them, which it's hard for me, because I am also figuring things out in this economy. So I think now taking the good thing that came out of all of that, that risk taking ability that they had and combine it with the knowledge that you have now and make it much more impactful for your life, for the future of your kids' life, and really break a lot of barriers that people, our generation and not from our background, really are trying to do. I genuinely think people are trying to, break a lot of cycles and break a lot of barriers because they know there's got to be a better way.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree 100% of the time. I didn't ask you this question at the beginning, but because nutrition is something that we don't really see in our culture, right? Like nobody knows what a dietitian is. Why, like what made you want to be a dietitian?
So I was a nursing major when I started because I have family members who are in the healthcare field, and I kind of always wanted to do a major that will lead to a career. Like I didn't want to do political science. Like I couldn't connect that with a career. So it had to be something that kind of was certified, lead to a very clear path. So nursing sounded great. And then I started my clinicals, which is kind of the second part of nursing, that you're like really at the hospital, and I hated it. Every nurse, I have to say, every nurse at the hospital I was at hated it. So that made me hate it even more. Then I kind of had to think, what else can I do? My mom had bakeries and restaurants when I was growing up. So I was good at food. I did not want to be a baker. Like I didn't want to cook for a living. I thought that was a very hard job, but I was good at it. So I went to Google and I'm like, I literally Google food, healthcare job, or it was something like professions that you can do if you're really good at cooking. So a nutritionist came at that, and dietitian really came as one of those options. And I began to Google it, and I really did a deep dive research on dietetics before I switched, because it was a big thing, like I needed to make sure this was something that I thought I wanted to do. So that's kind of how it happened. I searched about it, and then I saw there was a dietitian in my neighborhood that had a private practice, and then I reached out to her. I volunteer at her office, which I still talk to her to this day, and I tell her, listen, you are like the person I looked up all the time, because I wanted to have something like you had practice. And again, taking that background from my mom, who was a business owner, and I wanted to do that, and combining that with a career, that's really what drove me to nutrition. And then I began to like it as I began to, explore more and be more hands-on. But it was not like, oh, I've always wanted to be a dietitian, because I never, ever saw a nutritionist or dietitian in my life. And I should have, but never, because that was not a thing.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so wild, right? And even until this day, and you would think that people might know more about nutritionists, dietitians, which is not essentially the same. I did a presentation for a company around the holidays, and obviously introduced myself, and I said, "Who here knows what a dietitian is?" Zero. Nobody knew, and I was like, "Oh my god,
I believe you.
it's horrible."
Yeah.
But then I said, "Okay, how about who knows what a nutritionist is?" So people knew more what that was, but
probably not very correctly, because I think people think we just give diets and give a handout, because that's what you get at the hospital. You get a handout, but we don't do that. Just
right.
FYI, if you're listening, that's not all we do. And in fact, a lot of the good dietitians probably won't do that. So yeah, it also comes down to like also our background. In our culture, that's not a thing. That's not something that our parents grew up with. You just eat, and rice and beans or whatever we have, and that's, you don't think about it too much. So yeah.
Yeah. The reason why I went into dietetics is because my grandma, so she has diabetes, right? She would always come home from her appointments frustrated, right? Because they were, first of all, they didn't talk in her language, Spanish. She understood a little bit of English, but they would always tell her, well, you just need to stop eating beans, rice, and tortillas, right? Because of her diabetes. And so she would be frustrated, right? And saying, well, what am I going to eat? Like, that's all I can eat. I grew up eating these foods. So in my mind, I was like, that is wrong. Like, there has to be a way to teach people, right? Teach the community that they can still eat these foods and be healthy, right? Be balanced. So I looked into like nutrition, diabetes, and I forgot what else. And yeah, as soon as I got into that undergrad program, I loved it. And it's great. It has its ups and downs, but I think, I don't know, I love what I do as a dietitian. I love my career. Yeah.
Me too. I think you just gotta be creative in this career. That's all you need, because the sky is the limit. And going back to New York allowed me to dream big, because it's like in this city, you have way more options. I find that where I live in Florida, there's not a lot of options. It's limited and limiting here. Whereas in New York, I never had that feeling. I felt like, okay, if this doesn't work out, I'll go and do this. There was a never shortage of like doctors that I could talk to. And if I got on the internet to look for a job, because let's say this doesn't work out, I get a job. And that's the great thing, by the way, about being,
Mm-hmm.
I felt, at least as a dietitian, if this thing doesn't work out, I can get another job. Like I've never found like it being a difficulty ever. And again, I think this may be where you're at located. In New York, you just not have that issue. You have a lot more jobs, a lot more opportunities. If your whole thing, private practice, doesn't work out, you have this license that is so valued and It's up to you to take it where you want to take it. That's how I
Right.
see it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have the education, right? And that nobody's going to take that away from you, right? You did all the heavy lifting, all the work, and you're going to find a job, right? If, like you said, if your private practice doesn't work out, you can always find a different path. And the other amazing thing too, right, is that now there's so many dietitian jobs, right, and positions that are so interesting, right? Like marketing or like working for another food company or whatever. Like there's so many other areas too that might be of interest.
Yeah. I think now way more than before. You can be very creative. Like I say, I'm into sports nutrition now, and when I thought sports nutrition, and I learned this after I became a dietitian, which how did I not know this before? I thought sports nutrition was somehow this fat loss thing. Like weight loss, fat loss thing, and that's it. And then I saw all these other dietitians working for teams, like the Yankees and, the national football team or whatever. Like I was like, this is the coolest job. I mean, like I want that job, right? Unfortunately, you don't get paid well. That's one of the shittiest paying jobs, dietetics, but it's cool. I mean, you definitely have, I think you would have a great experience if you're young. I feel like that would be a job I would have liked to have when I was in my 20s, because I could have afford to not get paid, And it sounds horrible to even say, because I think you should not get paid $25 an hour, like as a dietitian. And a lot of these jobs like are $25 an hour. Because you're working for this big, amazing organization. But I think that's still a cool job. So there's so many interesting things that you can do now as a dietitian, but it depends on where you're at in life. There's a lot of corporate opportunities. I like more the business side of nutrition more than anything now, because that's where I see more potential for growth and not just being doing the same thing. Marketing is a big one. I don't love it. I think it depends on from what lens I see it. There's a lot of healthcare startups now that are popping up. Like you said at the beginning, some of these big companies. I saw a job the other day from a big telehealth company that they were looking for a dietitian management position to manage a team of 15 dietitians, but you didn't have to see patients. Like you were the manager, you were just gonna manage. Like, okay, that is an interesting job, but the pay was $65,000. I'm like, how am I gonna be a manager of 15 dietitians and get paid 65? Like this is again, we're going back to the low pay issue that we've had in our profession.
Yeah, that is wild, because you are in a management position.
And one thing I have learned, being in a management position like me as a private practice owner, I have 4 dietitians. I am not going to hire anybody until I can overpay them. This is kind of my mentality, because if I had great talent, the dietitians that I had, they were so talented, and I really enjoyed the work that they did, and I could close my eyes and have them see the patients, and I trusted them. But unfortunately, I cannot pay them adequately in New York City because it's expensive. New York City is expensive, and the insurance didn't pay me enough to pay that. So going back to what I said at the beginning, if you want to have good talent, you have to be able to offer them at the very least, an adequate pay or ownership. That's the other route that I would potentially consider. Give them some ownership of the company so they can actually, if you want them to behave like owners, make them owners. Give them a percentage of it so they can also get the dividends of the revenue from whatever you make at the end of the year. So
Right.
I don't know. That's what I think now. If I ever hire dietitians, I'll make them owners or overpay them.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think compensating them adequately, right? One helps us to keep them, right? But they also see it as like, okay, they are compensating me for what I'm actually value, right? They're valuing me in my expertise. So, okay, Naz, I know we've been chatting up, but what do you think? Like, what are some final thoughts, final tips that you would want to give out in terms of business or life in general?
Diversify. I think that's the really key. Once you start making a little bit of money, whether you are a W-2 employee or a business owner, begin to diversify your pool of income so that when something crazy happens, you're not get too much affected. I feel like it's harder to lose $100 than to make $100. It feels harder. So in order for you to not get that mental stress, you want to diversify once you have a chance to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know at least here in Fresno where I'm at, there are community groups. Like, for example, I'm part of the Central Valley Women's Community, and they have so many free workshops on how to invest or how to diversify. Sometimes, like I mentioned, the community colleges, they might have that. Or if you work for a corporate job, they usually have someone that works with them, like benefits-wise, and your 401k and investing. If you have no idea what that is, sometimes companies match you and you have to take advantage of that. So, look into those things. And this goes for anybody, not just dietitians, just anybody that has a corporate job. If your company is matching you, take advantage of that. That's free money. So, and yeah.
I also think to add on to that, forced savings. I'm a big fan of it. So like I use things like Acorn, which is an app that takes money out of your check every week, out of your account every week, and matches your whatever you know dollar amount to your investments. Forced saving is a big one. You set it and forget it. 1K. If you're a W-2, I think having a little private practice on the side is a way to diversify. If you're an employee, if you're a business owner looking into, the stock market perhaps, or the acorns, or just really diving into other businesses. Like I have my book. That's one way to diversify. I might not be making much of it, but who knows?
Right.
So things like that are going to eventually help you balance things out. When one asset class is not working well, you can at least rely on the other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's a saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket, I think.
Yes.
Some financial people might say. But awesome. Thank you so much, Naz, for this episode. I'm sure we'll be doing one in Spanish about nutrition or something.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
Where can the listeners find you? Where can they know more about you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as nasmaduro.nutrition and my website, nasmaduro.com.
Awesome. I'll make sure to add all that in the show notes and then a link to your book. Again, thank you so much for this amazing episode. To all the listeners, stay safe and stay strong. I will talk to you and see you soon. Bye-bye for now. This podcast, the links and resources provided are for the purpose to educate only and are not a replacement for medical advice or nutrition therapy. I suggest you seek out the help of a trained professional to help you with your specific situation and needs.